Sarah could still remember the moment her life had changed forever. A single misstep on the rugged trails of Windfall Ridge had sent her tumbling down a rocky slope, the sharp pain in her back a cruel precursor to the numbness that followed. At 15, she was forced to accept a reality she wasn't ready for, one where the vibrant, athletic girl she had been was now a wheelchair-bound observer of a world that kept moving forward. Her parents were loving but overwhelmed, struggling to adjust their lives to her new needs. The house underwent a rapid transformation, ramps replaced stairs, doorways were widened, and a bathroom was retrofitted to accommodate her. Sarah watched it all unfold with a strange detachment, as though these changes were happening to someone else. Deep down, though, she clung to the hope that her condition was temporary, that some miracle of medicine would return what the accident had taken. Years passed, and that hope began to dim. Sarah graduated high school, her wheelchair an ever-present companion. In college, she developed a knack for graphic design, her hands becoming the tools through which she created worlds of color and movement on her computer screen. It was a career she loved, but it didn't stop her from feeling like she was missing something. Every invitation to a hiking trip, every casual run by a friend, every dance floor spinning with laughter reminded her of what she'd lost. Sarah's small circle of friends became her lifeline. They treated her with a mix of normalcy and kindness that kept her spirits afloat. Still, there were nights when she'd roll to the window of her bedroom and stare out at the stars, wondering if she was destined to spend her life sitting down while the world stood tall. The city she lived in, New Haven, was a sprawling metropolis that pulsed with innovation. Towering skyscrapers and neon-lit streets were home to some of the brightest minds in technology. Sarah often read news stories about the breakthroughs happening just a few miles away, but they felt like distant dream scientists crafting robotic arms or neural implants for military use, far removed from the world of a woman who couldn't afford anything beyond a basic wheelchair. Her life changed the day Dr. Eliana Rostov moved into the house next door. A curious figure with sharp, intelligent eyes and a warmth that seemed to radiate from her every word, Eliana was unlike anyone Sarah had met. She was polite during their first meeting, asking questions about Sarah's work and offering to help with groceries or small tasks whenever she saw her struggling. It wasn't until weeks later, during a casual conversation over a shared cup of coffee, that Eliana revealed her profession. "I work in biomechanical engineering," she said, her voice soft yet brimming with passion. "Right now, I'm focused on integrating robotics with the human body. It's challenging but incredibly rewarding." Sarah's curiosity was piqued. "Like prosthetics?" she asked. Eliana nodded. "Yes, but more advanced than anything you've probably seen. Imagine not just replacing a limb, but creating one that feels and moves like the real thing or better." The idea sounded incredible, almost too good to be true. But Eliana's words planted a seed in Sarah's mind. For days after their conversation, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Was it possible that someone like her, someone who had spent over a decade unable to walk, could benefit from such technology? One crisp autumn evening, Eliana knocked on Sarah's door, a determined look on her face. "I've been thinking about you," she began. "Your story, your situation. I've been developing something experimental, but I believe it could work. If you're interested, I'd like to try." Sarah blinked, taken aback. "Try what?" Eliana smiled, a mixture of excitement and nervousness flashing in her eyes. "To help you walk again." In that moment, Sarah felt the first spark of hope she'd had in years. But hope, she knew, was a dangerous thing. It could lift you to the stars or crush you under its weight. And yet, looking at Eliana, she couldn't help but wonder, what if this time, hope wasn't a trap? What if it was a door? The following week, Sarah's home felt charged with anticipation. Eliana had invited her to visit her Lab, sleek, ultra-modern facility nestled within the sprawling tech district of New Haven. Sarah hadn't ventured into this part of the city often. It was a place of innovation and dreams, far removed from her world of ramps and accessibility modifications. Yet here she was, rolling into a building that gleamed with possibility. Eliana greeted her at the entrance, wearing a lab coat and an infectious smile. "You're right on time. Are you ready to see the future?" she said, her tone light but her eyes sparkling with conviction. Sarah hesitated. "I guess I'm as ready as I'll ever be." The lab was a symphony of technology. Holographic displays floated in midair, robotic arms performed delicate tasks with inhuman precision, and screens showcased live data streams in an array of colors and graphs. Eliana led Sarah to a central workspace where two humanoid legs rested on a metallic stand. They looked almost alive, sleek and elegant, with a design that blended practicality with artistry. Their metallic exteriors were covered in a material that mimicked human skin, but with a faint shimmer that hinted at their artificial nature. "These," Eliana said, gesturing to the legs, "are Project Stride. They're the culmination of years of research into neural integration and adaptive robotics. And I believe they're your ticket to walking again." Sarah stared at the legs, equal parts mesmerized and terrified. "How does it work?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eliana pulled up a holographic schematic. "The legs are powered by an AI system that learns from your movements and adapts in real time. But the real breakthrough is here." She pointed to a small implant at the base of the spine. "This neural interface will connect the legs to your nervous system. It'll translate the signals your brain is already sending, signals your body can't currently act on, and use them to control the legs. It's like teaching them to understand you." "That sounds incredible," Sarah said, her mind racing. "But also risky." Eliana nodded. "It is. This is experimental technology, and there are no guarantees. The integration process will take time, and there's a steep learning curve. You'll have to relearn how to walk, step by step. And, of course, there's the possibility that it might not work as intended." The weight of those words settled on Sarah's shoulders. For years, she had accepted her wheelchair as her reality. Now, she was being offered a chance to reclaim what she had lost, but at what cost? The fear of failure, of hope shattering into pieces once again, loomed large. "What happens if it doesn't work?" Sarah asked. "Then we'll learn from it," Eliana said gently. "But I believe in this. I believe in you. And I'll be with you every step of the way." For the next few days, Sarah wrestled with the decision. She spoke to her parents, who were supportive but cautious. Her friends, ever optimistic, encouraged her to take the leap. But ultimately, the choice was hers alone. Late one night, as she sat by her bedroom window, Sarah made up her mind. She thought about all the things she had missed over the years: the simple joy of standing tall, the freedom of walking down a street, the chance to dance at a friend's wedding. She realized that the fear of failure was nothing compared to the regret she would feel if she never tried. The next morning, Sarah called Eliana. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady. Eliana's relief was palpable even over the phone. "You won't regret this," she promised. "We'll start preparations right away." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of tests and simulations. Eliana and her team conducted detailed scans of Sarah's nervous system, mapping every neural pathway that would need to connect with the robotic legs. They explained each step of the process with patience and care, ensuring Sarah understood both the potential and the risks. Finally, the day of the procedure arrived. Sarah sat in the lab's sterile operating room, nerves bubbling under her calm exterior. Eliana crouched beside her, squeezing her hand. "This is the start of something extraordinary," she said. Sarah nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'm ready." As the anesthesia took hold and the room blurred into darkness, Sarah's last thought was a fragile yet determined hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could walk again. Sarah woke slowly, her mind thick with the fog of anesthesia. The sterile white ceiling of the recovery room came into focus, and for a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it hit her: the procedure. The neural implant. The robotic legs. Her heart raced as she tried to move. Her legs didn't respond immediately, but she felt a subtle shift in her lower body, a faint sensation that hadn't been there in over a decade. It wasn't the sensation of her real legs, but something new, something mechanical, yet alive. Eliana's face appeared above her, a hopeful smile on her lips. "Welcome back," she said softly. "How do you feel?" I don't know yet," Sarah admitted, her voice groggy. "Did it work?" Eliana nodded. "The surgery was a success. The neural interface is active and the legs are responding. But it's going to take time for you to adjust. Think of this as learning to walk all over again because, in a way, you are." The next few days were a blur of testing and calibration. Sarah spent hours in the lab, hooked up to monitoring equipment as the robotic legs were fine-tuned to her unique neural signals. Each adjustment brought her closer to a new kind of movement. The legs were astonishingly advanced, mimicking the natural range of motion and even compensating for uneven surfaces. But the real work began in the rehabilitation center. The first time Sarah tried to stand, she felt like a newborn fawn, wobbly, uncertain, and painfully aware of her reliance on the equipment around her. The robotic legs were powerful, but they required her brain to relearn the art of balance. With Eliana's help and the support of physical therapists, Sarah took her first, hesitant step. It was awkward and stilted, more of a controlled stumble than a stride, but it was a step. Tears sprang to her eyes as she looked at Eliana. "I did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. Eliana beamed. "You did. And you're going to do it again. And again. Until you're walking across this room without even thinking about it." The days turned into weeks, and each session brought new challenges. The AI within the legs was programmed to learn from her movements, adapting in real time to her gait and balance. At first, Sarah was hyper-aware of every mechanical movement, but over time, the legs began to feel like an extension of herself. She stumbled less, her steps grew steadier, and her confidence blossomed. Outside the lab, Sarah's story began to gain attention. Word of her transformation spread, and soon journalists were clamoring to interview her. At first, Sarah was reluctant. She didn't feel ready to share something so personal with the world. But Eliana reminded her of the bigger picture. "This isn't just about you," Eliana said. "Your journey could inspire others, push the boundaries of what's possible for people with disabilities." Eventually, Sarah agreed. Her first interview was broadcast on a local news channel. Sitting across from the reporter, she recounted her years in the wheelchair, the struggles she had faced, and the hope Eliana had given her. "It's not just about walking again," she said, her voice steady. "It's about freedom. About taking back a part of my life I thought I'd lost forever." As Sarah grew stronger, her progress accelerated. The day she walked unaided across the rehabilitation center was met with applause from the staff. For the first time in years, she stood tall, her hands free, her body upright. The moment was surreal, and she couldn't stop smiling. But the true test came when she returned to the world outside. Her first outing was to a park she hadn't visited since the accident. The paths were lined with towering trees, their leaves shimmering in the sunlight. As she walked along the trails, she felt the crunch of gravel beneath the robotic legs. People stared, some in curiosity, others in awe, but Sarah didn't mind. She was too busy reveling in the sensation of moving forward on her own 2 feet. That night, as she lay in bed, Sarah reflected on her journey. The road ahead was still uncertain. There were more hurdles to overcome, more adjustments to make, but for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. Her robotic legs had given her more than mobility. They had given her a future. And she couldn't wait to see where they would take her. The city skyline shimmered in the evening light as Sarah stood on the rooftop of Eliana's lab, gazing out at the sprawling metropolis below. The event was her first public appearance since regaining her mobility, a celebration of both her journey and the technological marvel that had made it possible. The invitation-only audience included journalists, scientists, and advocates for disability rights, all eager to hear her story. Sarah adjusted the hem of her simple but elegant dress, still getting used to the feeling of standing without relying on her wheelchair. The robotic legs, though integrated into her body and mind, still felt miraculous. They had become part of her identity, not replacing her, but enhancing her, allowing her to reclaim what had been taken from her so many years ago. Eliana stood beside her, a mixture of pride and nervous excitement in her expression. "You're going to be amazing," she said, squeezing Sarah's hand. "Just speak from the heart." When it was time, Sarah stepped onto the small stage. The crowd quieted, their attention fixed on her. She took a moment to look out at the sea of faces, her heart pounding, before she began. 10 years ago, I lost the ability to walk," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "At first, I thought I'd lost more than that: my freedom, my independence, my future. It took me a long time to accept my new reality and to find ways to thrive within it. But even as I adapted, I never stopped dreaming about what it might feel like to stand again. To move through the world on my own 2 feet. She paused, glancing at Eliana, who nodded encouragingly. "That dream felt impossible until I met Dr. Eliana Rostov. Her vision, her determination, and her compassion gave me something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Today, I'm walking not just because of technology, but because someone believed in me enough to make the impossible possible." The audience erupted in applause, but Sarah wasn't finished. "This isn't just my story," she continued. "It's the story of what's possible when innovation meets humanity. It's about what we can achieve when we refuse to accept limitations and instead choose to create solutions. I'm standing here today not just for myself, but for every person who's been told they can't. Together, we can redefine what's possible." The applause was thunderous. Sarah stepped back, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. She had never imagined herself as a symbol of hope, but if her story could inspire even one person, it was worth it. As the months passed, Sarah's life transformed in ways she couldn't have foreseen. The media attention catapulted her into the spotlight, and she became an advocate for accessibility and advancements in assistive technology. She traveled to conferences, schools, and hospitals, sharing her story and promoting the integration of technology to improve lives. Her journey inspired legislation that increased funding for disability-related innovations and pushed for universal design in public spaces. But for Sarah, the most meaningful changes were personal. She returned to the trails she'd loved before the accident, her robotic legs adapting seamlessly to the uneven terrain. For the first time since she was 15, she felt the rush of hiking to a summit and standing above the world, the wind in her hair and the horizon stretching endlessly before her. She also rediscovered her love of dancing. At a friend's wedding, she hesitated at first, uncertain if her movements would feel natural. But as the music filled the room, she let herself go, moving to the rhythm with a freedom she hadn't known in years. Her friends cheered her on, their joy reflecting her own. Through it all, Sarah stayed connected to Eliana. The two formed a bond that went beyond patient and scientist. They became friends, partners in a shared mission to make technology accessible to everyone who needed it. Together, they worked on new projects, refining the robotic legs and expanding their potential applications. One evening, Sarah stood in front of a classroom filled with young students, many of whom used wheelchairs, prosthetics, or other assistive devices. She spoke about her journey, but more importantly, she listened to their dreams. One boy raised his hand and asked, "Do you think we'll all have super legs like yours one day?" Sarah smiled. "I don't just think it, I believe it. Because the future is about breaking barriers, and you're the generation that's going to do it." As she left the school, Sarah reflected on how far she had come. Her journey hadn't just been about walking again, it had been about rediscovering herself and realizing the boundless potential within the human spirit. The robotic legs had given her a gift, but they were just tools. The real transformation had happened inside her. And as she walked forward, she knew the future held infinite possibilities not just for her, but for everyone willing to believe in something greater.